The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a pale glow over the quiet suburban street. The stillness was broken only by the distant hum of a passing car and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Michael sat on his porch, a sense of unease settling over him as he stared into the darkness that surrounded his home. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle anything that came his way. But tonight was different. A feeling of being watched had been gnawing at him since he'd arrived home from work. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia, the product of a stressful day, but the sensation persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. With a sigh, Michael stood up and walked into his living room. He glanced around, the shadows playing tricks on his mind. He turned on every light in the house, hoping to dispel the creeping sense of dread that had taken hold of him. Despite his efforts, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. His gaze fell on the large window that overlooked his backyard. The darkness beyond seemed to stretch endlessly, an abyss that held secrets he couldn't fathom. He closed the curtains, blocking out the view, and forced himself to sit on the couch, determined to distract himself with the television. But as the minutes ticked by, the unease only intensified. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound, seemed to magnify his sense of vulnerability. The feeling of being watched was no longer a whisper in the back of his mind. It was a relentless, pounding presence that refused to be ignored. With a sense of resignation, Michael decided to call his friend Alex. He knew Alex would mock him for his paranoia, but he needed the reassurance of another voice, someone to tell him he was imagining things. Alex picked up after a few rings. "Hey, what's up?" "Hey, it's Michael," he replied, his voice tense. "Listen, I know this sounds crazy, but I've got this feeling like I'm being watched. I can't shake it." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Alex chuckled. "You've been watching too many horror movies, man. You're probably just stressed out. Get some rest, and you'll feel better." Michael wanted to believe him, but the sensation was too overwhelming. "I can't explain it, Alex. It's like there's someone outside my house, lurking in the shadows." Alex's tone softened. "Look, if it'll make you feel better, I can come over. We can hang out, have a few drinks, and prove that there's nothing to worry about." Relief flooded over Michael. "Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Alex." After hanging up, Michael paced around his living room, his anxiety growing as he waited for Alex to arrive. The minutes stretched into an eternity, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. He felt a knot in his stomach, a premonition that he was about to face something he couldn't comprehend. Finally, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke through the silence. Michael rushed to the door and swung it open, greeted by Alex's familiar grin. "See? I told you there was nothing to worry about," Alex said as he stepped inside. The presence of another person eased the tension that had been building within Michael. They settled in the living room, sharing stories and laughs over a couple of beers. The feeling of being watched began to fade, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and comfort. Hours passed, and as the clock neared midnight, Alex stood up. "I should probably head home. Thanks for the drinks, man." Michael nodded, his gratitude evident. "Yeah, thanks for coming over. I feel a lot better now." As Alex walked toward the door, Michael's sense of unease returned in a rush. He felt like he was being pulled by an invisible force, a compulsion to check outside one more time. He followed Alex to the door, his gaze fixed on the backyard beyond the window. "What's up?" Alex asked, noticing Michael's distracted expression. "I don't know." It's just Michael's voice trailed off as he saw movement in the darkness, a figure that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Alex turned to look, his expression curious. "What is it?" And then they both saw it, a silhouette standing just beyond the reach of the porch light. The figure was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. Fear clenched at Michael's chest. and he felt a sickening realization that this was what he had been sensing all along. The feeling of being watched had been real. It wasn't just paranoia. There was someone out there, someone who shouldn't be there. "Who is that?" Alex whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Michael replied, his heart pounding in his ears. The figure took a step forward, its movements deliberate and unsettling. Michael's instinct was to slam the door shut, to lock out the danger that stood just inches away. But a morbid curiosity kept him frozen in place, his gaze locked onto the intruder. "What do you want?" Alex called out, his voice wavering. The figure remained silent, its presence a malevolent force that seemed to suffocate the air around them. Michael's mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. He had to protect himself, to protect Alex. Summoning his courage, Michael stepped forward, his voice quivering but determined. "You need to leave. Now." The figure didn't respond, its silence a chilling affirmation that something was deeply wrong. Michael's heart raced as he glanced at Alex, who was visibly shaken. Without warning, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness, its form blending seamlessly with the night. Michael watched it go, a cold dread settling over him. The sense of being watched had evolved into something much more sinister, the certainty that they were being hunted. "We need to call the police," Alex said, his voice urgent. Michael nodded, his fear propelling him into action. He reached for his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaky as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. The minutes dragged on as they waited for the police to arrive, their anxiety growing with each passing second. When the flashing lights of the patrol cars finally illuminated the street, Michael felt a rush of relief. The police officers arrived, their expressions serious as they listened to the description of the intruder. "We'll search the area. Stay inside and keep your doors locked," one of the officers instructed. As the police fanned out to search for the intruder, Michael and Alex remained in the safety of the house. The minutes turned into hours, and the tension in the air was palpable. The feeling of vulnerability had returned, a reminder that danger could be lurking just beyond their reach. Finally, the police returned, their expressions grim. "We didn't find anyone matching the description," one of the officers said. "But we'll increase patrols in the area. If you see anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call." Michael and Alex thanked the officers, their gratitude mixed with frustration. The threat was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and they were left to wonder if they were safe within the confines of their own home. As the night wore on, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder was still watching, still lurking just beyond their perception. He locked every window and door, his every instinct screaming at him to protect himself. Hours turned into restless sleep, and when Michael awoke the next morning, the sun's feeble light did little to chase away his unease. He glanced out the window, half expecting to see the figure standing in his yard once more. But the backyard was empty, the morning calm belying the events of the previous night. Determined to regain a sense of normalcy, Michael decided to go about his day as usual. He left his house, his gaze sweeping the street for any sign of the intruder. But the neighborhood was quiet, the houses standing as silent sentinels against the backdrop of blue sky. As the days turned into weeks, Michael's unease remained a constant companion. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the intruder was biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He installed security cameras around his property, hoping to catch any sign of the intruder's return. But the cameras captured only the mundane activities of daily life: neighbors walking their dogs, children riding their bikes. The sense of being hunted was as elusive as ever, a presence that seemed to linger just beyond the edge of his awareness. Michael's obsession with his own safety began to strain his relationships. Friends grew tired of his constant paranoia, and even Alex started to distance himself. Michael was alone, trapped in a cycle of fear and anxiety, unable to escape the clutches of his own mind. One evening, as Michael sat in his living room, his gaze fixed on the security camera feeds, he noticed something unusual. A shadow moved across the screen, a shape that seemed to materialize out of thin air. His heart raced as he focused on the figure, his fear mingling with a morbid curiosity. The figure moved closer to the camera, its features obscured by the darkness. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, ready to call the police. But before he could dial, the figure turned and disappeared, leaving only the empty yard in its wake. With a sense of urgency, Michael rushed to the front door and flung it open, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of the intruder. But the neighborhood was once again quiet, the world outside carrying on as if nothing had happened. Doubt gnawed at Michael's mind. Had he imagined the figure? Was his paranoia consuming him, distorting his perception of reality? He wanted to believe that he was overreacting, that his fear had conjured an illusion. But deep down, he knew the truth. The feeling of being watched was real. The intruder was real, and they were still out there, an unwanted companion that refused to let go. As Michael closed the door and retreated into his house, the sense of vulnerability settled over him once more. The safety he had once taken for granted was shattered, replaced by a constant state of hyper-awareness. He knew that he was no longer alone, that the intruder's presence was an inescapable reality he had to face. Night after night, Michael sat by his window, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. He knew that the intruder could return at any moment, that the threat was as real as the air he breathed, but he was determined to confront it, to finally put an end to the torment that had consumed his life. And as the moon hung low in the night sky, casting its pale glow over the suburban street, Michael waited. He wasn't waiting for the intruder to make the first move. He was waiting to reclaim his sense of security, to prove that he could face the unknown with courage and determination. The minutes stretched into hours, and the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly. But Michael remained vigilant, his resolve unshaken. He knew that the intruder was out there, lurking just beyond the edge of his perception. But he was no longer content to be the hunted. He was ready to become the hunter. And so, as the night wore on, Michael's fear transformed into a quiet determination. He would confront the intruder, face the darkness head-on, and prove that he was not powerless. The moonlight illuminated his unwavering gaze, a beacon of defiance against the unsettling presence that had invaded his life. As dawn broke, casting its warm light over the quiet suburban street, Michael stood up from his vigil by the window. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, that the path to reclaiming his sense of security would be fraught with challenges. But he was ready to face whatever lay ahead, to finally free himself from the clutches of the unwanted companion that had haunted his every moment. And as he walked away from the window, his steps were resolute, his spirit unbroken. The sense of being watched was no longer a source of fear. It was a reminder of his strength, his resilience, and his unwavering determination to confront the unknown and emerge victorious.